The fierce fire of the war in Ukraine has engulfed all of Russia, while the Russian army is losing one after the other in Ukraine. Fires are breaking out in the military units in the Russian territory. In the past month, Russian lands have turned into a hell for the Russian army. When we examine the regions where suspicious fires and various explosions occurred, one by one, incidents are experienced in a wide range, covering almost 70% of the Russian territory. Russian soldiers no longer feel safe anywhere. It had been known for a long time that these fires would flare up after the Russian army failed in the siege of Kiev in Ukraine. The Russian people began to react to Putin. The anti-war Russian partisans carried out their first actions on Russian soil and openly threatened Putin. But Putin, with his unwavering self-confidence, ignored these threats and signed a crazy mobilization decision. After this mobilization decision, it was the beginning of great chaos for Russia, noting that a total of 72 Russian military headquarters were burned or blown up in the Russian territory, mostly in Moscow, Belgorod, and annexed Crimea. The Kremlin is trying to hide the cause of these fires behind the fog of war, but that doesn't seem very possible. Let's take a more comprehensive look at the subject together. After examining the latest mysterious fire in the large Russian military camp in Russia's Tomsk region, as well as other incidents, Russian soldiers who participated in military training in Tomsk before going to the front in Ukraine were hit by a huge fire. A fire broke out at a Russian military training camp that burned the living quarters of at least a dozen soldiers in the latest incident that hit those training to fight in Ukraine. A video shared online shows a massive fire engulfed at least 3 military tents in Tomsk in southwestern Russia, Serbia. In the footage, sirens can be heard as camp residents tried to put out the fire. It is surprising that such a fire broke out in such a cold region. In freezing conditions, Russian men can be heard shouting in anger as they contemplate what to do. The flames reach a height of several meters with black smoke pouring several hundred feet into the air. According to local reports, 3 tents and some personal items were burned. However, there were no casualties, although there was no loss of life. Russia lost another military unit with the destruction caused by the fire. It is thought that the fire was caused by Russian soldiers who were desperate not to fight in Ukraine. Since Vladimir Putin announced the mass mobilization of 300,000 soldiers on September 21st, there have been a series of unexplained fires and epidemics in Russian training camps. Finally, most likely, the Russians from Tomsk decided to burn their equipment and weapons to delay their war trips. They once again broke the smoking rules at a military camp for mobilized soldiers in Tomsk, Russia. This was a new disappointment for Russia. Let's brainstorm together at this. At this point, you are a Russian citizen and your leader is trying to send you to the front where you are very likely to die in order to fulfill his fantasies. Many of your friends left the country after the mobilization call, but you are in the unlucky minority who have not been able to leave the country. What comes to your mind? First, after being taken to the camp, of course, prolonging the planned process by setting a fire in the camp. Some of the Russian soldiers are doing the same. They don't want to fight, but they don't have a leader to say that to. In addition, in many cases that occur in military camps or recruitment centers within Russia, we see that angry and desperate Russian soldiers or mobilized people set fire to Russian facilities or attack Russian commanders. We have witnessed this many times before. In fact, in late December, an angry Russian soldier had beaten his commander in the barracks to death again. In early December, an experienced Russian commander who trained Russian soldiers went in front of the camera and called to the Kremlin, saying that the camp conditions were very bad. There was no body armor to wear in the freezing cold. There was not enough food and the training would not work, and rebelled against the Kremlin administration. Also earlier this month, a Russian military barracks in Crimea burst into flames and many thought it was a case of self-sabotage. The barracks was located at a military base in Savitskoye and was said to have several hundred soldiers. Images of the fire showed the flames reaching several meters high from various channels, suggesting that these were people killed and injured in the attack. However, this claim was not confirmed. However, the Tomsk fire is similarly claimed as a simple fire by the Russian regime under the pressure of the Kremlin, according to Russian media. The emergency occurred during the day. According to preliminary data, a house fire broke out at the scene, as a result of which the stove was used only for heating. While no one was injured in the fire in the mobilization camp, the personal belongings of the citizens mobilize realized in the fire were damaged and destroyed. It is now known that the spread of the fire was prevented. At the same time, sources refute the version among Russian military reporters that sabotage could be the cause of everything, noting that only a house fire was mentioned. Meanwhile, Russian mobilized video footage from the scene leaves this information blurred because since the very beginning of the war, Russia gave the same reaction to fires in any part of Russia. But even Moscow felt the warmth of the fire of rebellion. Since February 24th, explosions and fires have occurred at 72 military registration and enlistment offices, military bases, warehouses, and other military installations on the territory of Russia and in the Crimea. They often set fire to military registration and recruitment offices and recruitment centers. The first case occurred in February, 4 days after the start of the war. A 21-year-old living in Lukovitsy, near Moscow, broke 2 windows of the local military registration and an enlistment office and threw bottles of Molotov cocktails into it. Cases of arson were recorded each month, but most were recorded in May and September through October, after the announcement of partial mobilization. Other facilities, including military units, ammunition depots, airports, and other buildings associated with the military-industrial complex, have burned down at least 28 times since February 24th. In the last month of summer, fires occurred at facilities in the Moscow region, Belgorod region, and Crimea on the territory of the peninsula. Several events occurred at once. Fires broke out in succession at airfields, an ammunition depot, and a military unit. Also in October, numerous fires were recorded in the Yaroslavl region and the ammunition depot near Belgorod. In addition to traditional military facilities, fires occurred twice on the territory of the Research Institute of the Ministry of Defense in Tver and in the building of a gunpowder factory in Perm. In general terms, this war was the trigger for a major fire for Putin's Russia. So what does this war mean for Ukraine in 2023? In less than 2 months, the war in Ukraine will reach its first anniversary. The fact that Ukraine exceeded expectations in terms of both its armed forces and the overall resilience of the Ukrainian nation should be celebrated. While there is no doubt that Ukraine is determined to fight, at the same time, by all indications, the allegations in Putin and Moscow have doubled their commitment to win. This is now a war of attrition, and although on paper, Moscow seems to have an advantage in terms of population and territory, other factors, namely the human factor and ammunition, may be decisive in this war. The war in Ukraine has demonstrated the critical importance of human factor in the war. It illustrated how dangerous and destructive the megalomania of a dictator, especially one who's been in power for a long time, can be, or how the corruption circulating in Russia's bloodstream could consistently produce skewed intelligence assessments of the country's military capabilities and overestimate Putin above all. And contrary to the realist paradigm in political science, Ukraine has once again demonstrated what a mobilized, free and patriotic people can achieve when their homes are attacked and their citizens killed. But the Ukraine war is quickly turning into a war of numbers. Simply put, the war has become all about ammo, and this applies to both Russians and Ukrainians. Praised Russian stockpiles are depleted at rates only Soviet-era planners could have foreseen in the event of all-out war against NATO. At the height of summer, when Moscow took a page from the Soviet playbook to replace a massive artillery hammer for maneuver, the Russians were firing around 60,000 rounds a day, sometimes more. Today, Russians can fire a maximum of 20,000 rounds per day, usually less, and they dig a ditch deep into their own remaining stock to maintain even this limited rate. This is an unsustainable reality for Russia. Vladimir Putin is trying to fight the whole West. However, it will not destroy the will of free people so easily. Nations that cannot protect their skies cannot protect their future with the conflicts that took place in the late 20th century. Air threats on a world scale increased with the development of technology. Both air defense systems and air threat elements have developed in these days of the most violent conflicts of the 21st century. Air defense systems once again emphasized their importance in the relentless war between Russia and Ukraine. Many air defense systems, especially the S-300 batteries, are among the issues that occupy the agenda, especially Ukraine's shooting of Russian S-300 batteries gives Putin a cold shower effect. Let's take a closer look at how Ukraine neutralized Russian air defense systems. The Ukrainian war continues with fierce clashes on the eastern and southern front lines. The new developments on the southern front line reveal the impasse of the Russian army. The Ukrainian military has released a new video claiming it shows the destruction of a Russian air defense battery in southern Ukraine. The video was first shared on the official Facebook page by the Southern Operational Command Formation of the Ukrainian Army. The video shows the wreckage, which initially looked like some kind of truck. In the later minutes of the video, a large number of burned and smoking debris can be seen. The post claimed that the targets were a battery of S-300 surface-to-air missile systems operated by Russian forces. The statement said that while performing fire missions, Ukrainian missile and artillery units destroyed an S-300 air defense system battery near Zelino. Krepinski Zelino Tropica is located in Ukraine's Kherson Oblast, one of the southernmost regions of the country. The region is located just north of the Crimean Peninsula, which Russia annexed from Ukraine in 2014. The Russian forces who wanted to achieve an important success on the southern front line were shot in the heart. The cost of Russia's S-300 air defense system is $115 million, not only in terms of financing, but also in the field of air dominance. Russia has lost a lot of credibility with these attacks, but on paper, the Russian army has the best arsenal against airstrikes. One of the batteries of multi-layer surface-to-air missiles capable of detecting and destroying the best-known systems, aircraft and ballistics, is the S-300. What is the S-300 air defense system? The S-300 anti-air missile systems are Soviet-era military technology introduced nearly 40 years ago with a targeting range of only 75 miles. A workhorse of Soviet and Russian air defense, the system is considered Russia's closest counterpart to the U.S. Patriot air and missile defense system. Various elements of the S-300 include a long-range surveillance, radar engagement, radar and launch vehicles, as well as a command vehicle capable of controlling the entire S-300 battery. Both Moscow and Kiev use the S-300 during their current conflict in early July. Modern ammunition was exhausted due to the protracted conflict in Ukraine. It has been reported that Russian forces are becoming increasingly dependent on such outdated equipment. 6 attacks on Mykolaiv over the first weekend of July were attributed to S-300 missiles. At the same time, it was reported that Russia was increasingly relying on Kh-32 missiles, which were originally designed to sink ships. Versions of the air-to-air missiles were used for attacks on the Kremenchuk shopping center in June, which killed 18 people, and on an Odessa apartment complex which killed 20. Despite the original intentions of these weapons, the Russian forces, whose stocks were dwindling, had to rely on the S-332s to hit ground targets. To do this, they were equipped with GPS systems that allowed them to be roughly guided to military targets. While Russia lost its S-300 batteries, Belarus began training on nuclear-capable missiles. Belarusian troops are trying to distract the Ukrainian troops on the northern border of the country. Belarusian forces are training to use nuclear-capable Iskander ballistic missiles. The Russian Ministry of Defense announced on its official Telegram channel that the Belarusian crew had been trained in the use of Iskander short-range ballistic missiles capable of low-yield nuclear fire in the southern military district of Russia since the beginning of April. In the Telegram post, it was reported that special attention was paid to the further development of practical skills in preparing the missile system for use, training for deployment, and conducting combat training launches. As a reminder, Russian President Vladimir Putin announced in March that tactical nuclear weapons would be deployed to Belarus. The announcement was interpreted as the Kremlin's latest attempt to weaken the West's support for Ukraine using the nuclear threat. Vladimir Putin did not say when the weapons will be transported to Belarus. Putin said that a storage facility for warheads will be completed in July. The president stated that Russian forces will also train their Belarusian counterparts in the use of ballistic missiles and modified Su-24 aircraft that can be used to deliver warheads to the target. The announcement was met with international condemnation even from China, which has so far been sympathetic to Moscow's war against Ukraine. The Belarusian opposition condemned the country's president, Alexander Lukashenko, and Putin for putting the country in the line of fire in any future direct conflict between Russia and NATO. A senior opposition official also stated that any nuclear deployment on Belarusian soil would lead to an increase in anti-Lukashenko partisan activity. Franek Vyakorka, chief political advisor to Belarusian opposition leader Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya, said the deployment of Russian nuclear weapons could make life more difficult for Lukashenko. Also, Ukrainian and foreign officials have suggested that the continued Russian presence in Belarus is intended to distract Kiev, which is planning its spring counterattack, which is expected to focus on the eastern or southern fronts. Ukraine and its foreign partners hope that, as with the previous counterattack, operations around Kiev in the spring of 2022 and around Kharkiv and Kherson in the fall, the next offensive will liberate important lands. Ukraine is keeping secret where the counterattack operations will begin. However, experts predict that the counterattack will begin on the southern front line. The developments in the Dnipro River confirm this prediction. According to conflict analysts, Ukrainian troops managed to cross the Dnipro River in the south of the country for the first time since the beginning of the Russian invasion. Russian war correspondent Romanov confirmed that the Ukrainian armed forces had landed on the left bank of the Dnipro in the Kherson region. A group of up to 30 Ukrainian soldiers landed on the left bank of the Dnipro. Ukrainian troops occupied a beachhead for new offensives deep in the Kherson region, according to a Russian military correspondent. The Ukrainian army is currently on the coastline and is probably preparing to further strengthen their position, according to the information given by Romanov. The positions of the Ukrainian army on the left bank of the Dnipro are relatively close to the positions of the Russian army. Until now, information about the presence of the Ukrainian army on the left bank of the Kherson region was very controversial. However, no official statement has been made yet from the Ministry of Defense on this matter. Crossing the Dnipro is crucial to the Ukrainian military's goal of controlling Crimea, which Moscow annexed 9 years ago. Ukrainian troops aim to advance about 161 kilometers south of the river, at least as far as annexed Crimea. This breakthrough comes just after rumors of a partial withdrawal from Russia's Kherson region. On the other hand, according to the reports of the Institute for War Studies, Ukrainian forces established positions near the town of Voleshki across the Dnipro Delta from Kherson. According to the report, Ukrainian forces are advancing towards the nearby village of Dapki. It is also claimed that Ukrainian troops held these positions for several weeks and secured supply lines. This claim also shows that there is no Russian control in the region. In summary, Russia has deployed a large number of S-300 and S-400 air defense systems, as well as electronic intelligence and radar systems. In many regions, they would normally be expected to detect and destroy any aircraft in the air covering most of Ukraine. Russia similarly has several systems along the Ukrainian border and in Belarus. Despite all these possibilities and capabilities, there was a significant weakness in providing air dominance from the first day of the war. This makes us think that Russia is not planning a full operation or has a weakness in this direction. The fact that Kiev also hit the S-300 batteries strengthens this possibility. Can Russia win the dominance of the skies in the coming days? A Russian oil tanker was caught on fire in the harbor near St. Petersburg. Massive fires seem to have become almost an everyday occurrence in Russia. 2 days ago, locals in Novosibirsk reported hearing several explosions, which seemed to have started a fire that burned down 2,000 meters squared of the ground. 4 days ago in Kobani, a big shopping mall caught on fire, burning down 2 floors and 1,000 meters squared of ground. The same day, a military supply depot in Murmansk suffered the same fate. The conclusions of the Russian officials converged on one explanation: sabotage. In fact, these fires became such a huge problem that the Kremlin itself started taking action. Yesterday, Russian President Putin sent a supplement to the Russian criminal code that allows Russian authorities to sentence Russians to up to life imprisonment for resistance to subversive actions or for undergoing training for the purpose of carrying out sabotage activities and for organizing a sabotage community, and between 5 and 10 years imprisonment for participation in such community. The increased number of incidents in different parts of the country, given the ongoing war in Ukraine and intermittent sabotage by the Ukrainian special services, gave rise to certain suspicions of a direct connection between the events. Some Russian sources increasingly circulate information that the Ukrainians have recruited a lot of Russian residents to participate in sabotage. Recently, the head of the Ukrainian secret services indirectly confirmed these claims and stated that they have a huge number of men and women operators on the territory of the Russian Federation. He said that this are trained and sophisticated agents who have in many cases even undergone plastic surgery and changed their identity. It seems like this interview, to a large extent, amplified the panic in the Russian media space. And no wonder, because over the last 3 months, there were more than 40 large-scale fires on trading industrial and military objects in Russia, and 10 of them happened only in Moscow. This map is slightly outdated, so it shows fewer cases. A prominent Russian source tried to compare the number of fires to the last year and concluded that there was only 25% increase in accidents, which in their estimation is insignificant. However, it is unclear how they picked the data for the last year. The data generation process and conclusions beg some questions because the square area of fires has increased by to 64%, and such a high concentration of fires in Moscow and the regions close to Ukraine might suggest that this is not due to typical Russian neglect of fire safety measures. In addition, the current situation in the region's border in Ukraine leaves many Russians upset. The Russians have significant gaps in the organization of defense due to bureaucratic delays or ordinary human stupidity, which can be used by sabotage and reconnaissance group for sabotage in the deep Russian rear. Even though Ukrainian officials are formally denying that Ukraine has anything to do with all the accidents that are happening inside Russia, they still leave the door for speculations open, and it looks like it is a smart move. The slow realization that the Ukrainians could hit the deep Russian rear with drones played a huge role in the recent missile strike. The realization that there are enough gaps in the organization of Russian army and state administration may cause even more paranoia, leading to serious problems for the Russians. So what do you guys think about this issue? Please express your thoughts in the comments. Please do not forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications in order to be informed about new videos. Thank you for watching us.